Today, I want to talk a little bit about something called stereotyping. And stereotyping, at a surface level, we probably all know what that's about, but it relates to this whole thing of prejudice, and it's helpful to understand stereotyping in order to kind of understand prejudice a little bit better. So as we're walking through this talk today, or any of the talks this month, if you have questions, feel free to text them to me, and we'll try to respond the best we can to that, either right here in the service or online. So my number is that one on the screen right there, so you can text it to there. And at that evening that we had last fall, I remember one of the things that stood out to me was this idea that probably the most dangerous idea that any of us can embrace is this idea that I don't have any bias, that I am not prejudiced, that I am not racist in any way. That kind of surprised me, because I want to believe that I'm not biased. I want to believe that I'm not racist. I want to believe that I'm not prejudiced. And yet, it was quite clear that night that that's a very dangerous assumption to make. So we want to look at how Jesus responded to this idea of stereotyping this morning. And Jesus actually reacted to this in a lot of different ways, in different situations. And so I'm just going to pick one of them. I want to look at the story of the Good Samaritan. Some of you may be familiar with that, even if church is a new thing to you. The Good Samaritan idea is pretty prevalent in our culture. But it comes from the Bible, actually. A lot of people don't realize that. And so here's sort of the backstory. So there was this prevalent Jewish leader that came to Jesus, and he said, "What's the most important thing that I, as a good religious person, can be doing?" And in good Jewish fashion, and Jews still do this today, Jesus didn't answer directly. He actually answered with a question. And so he said, "Well, what do you think?" And this guy had been paying attention to Jesus' teaching. So his response was, "Well, I think the most important thing is that we love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and our neighbor as ourself." Well, the first part of that was very typical for the Jews. They believed that you should actually love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. But Jesus had taken this other commandment, the one about loving your neighbor as yourself, which was sort of just a very minor commandment, sort of hidden away in the back of the law. The Jews had 613 laws or commandments that they followed. And some of them they emphasized much more so than others. And so this part about loving God, that was sort of the pinnacle of the commandments for all the Jews. They actually had that as part of a prayer called the Shema that they would pray several times a day. And they still do that. Devoted Jews still pray the Shema several times a day. And in that is love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. So that was sort of the preeminent one. And then tucked way in sort of the back of all of those 613 commandments was this idea of loving your neighbor as yourself. But Jesus took that way sort of obscure little commandment to love your neighbor as yourself, and he made that equal to the predominant commandment of the whole thing in the Jewish mindset. So this was pretty radical and shocking for many of them. But this guy had been paying attention, so he knew what Jesus had said, and so he responds with that same thing back to Jesus. And Jesus said, "Good for you. You've obviously been paying attention." Jesus' whole ministry was about this idea of loving your neighbor. Like, the Jews had all these hierarchies of who you needed to treat with respect and how much respect and so on, so down the line. And Jesus was wiping out all of that and saying, no, we love everybody just the same as we love ourselves. But then this religious leader wanted to take it one step further, and he said, "But who is my neighbor?" So he's obviously challenging Jesus to define what his hierarchy was. So there's this stereotyping, hierarchical prejudice thing going on here with this religious leader. And in response to that, Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan. So that's where we're going to pick it up. Luke chapter 10 and verse 30. So, in reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead." And so this road from Jerusalem to Jericho was very, very treacherous. It was very hilly, and there's lots of places where it was very suitable for ambushes. And so it was not recommended at all that you travel that road, especially by yourself. So when Jesus used this as his backdrop for his story, everybody that was listening to him would have got it. They would have been like, "Oh, yeah, I know that place." Sort of like, there's some places in the city that you don't want to go by yourself at night. That kind of a thing. So they would have totally got it that, Jesus is talking about a very dangerous place. And actually, they probably would have had some of the wives that would have been nudging their husbands going, "See, I told you, you're not supposed to go there by yourself." And they would have been, you listen up here now. So anyway, then Jesus goes on and he says, "A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed on the other side." So a priest was a very highly respected spiritual leader in Israel at that time. Basically, the priests ruled the people. They also were basically the doctors in that day, as well as the health inspectors at that time. So they had very high influence in people's lives and were very highly respected and revered there. And basically the priest was the link between God and mere mortals. So you couldn't worship God without going through a priest in that time. And so they were very key people in that culture. Now, this priest would have known all of the commandments by heart, including the commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. So as he approached this fellow that was laying there on the road, beaten by the robbers, he would have known that that was one of the commandments. But he chose to not obey that commandment. Likely, this priest was on his way back to Jerusalem, maybe, to the temple. And basically, he could have justified what he was like, leaving that guy there by saying, well, I have to be at the temple by a certain time to help people worship God. And worshiping God is more important than taking care of this fellow here. I mean, Loving God with all your soul, mind, strength, and heart is more important than loving your neighbor as yourself. And so he just walked on by. You know, the interesting thing to me is that there are people that still think like that to this day. Maybe you've met people like this. You know, on Sundays, they're all prettied up and they have their best behavior on when they're in church and all smiles and, hi, how are you? I love you with the love of the Lord and all of that good stuff. But then come Monday, they treat everybody terribly. It's like they're a totally different person. It's just like there's one persona in church and then a completely different person the rest of the week. Don't put up your hand if you know somebody like that, but I've met people like that. It's sad, isn't it? They're just like this priest. It's like, no, worshiping God, that's important, but loving my neighbor, not so much. So Jesus is showing them how their stereotype of the priests was actually very inaccurate. He was showing them that the priests did not necessarily follow all of the commandments of God, even though they were supposed to be these holy people. Okay, let's keep moving. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. So a Levite was a full-time employee in the temple. So they were basically in full-time ministry. They were also very highly regarded as spiritual people. And many, many spiritual people in Israel at that time justified not loving your neighbor as yourself, especially if something bad had happened to them, like they were robbed, or like they got sick, or like they were poor, or something like that. They justified not caring for them by saying, well, you know, God must be cursing you for something you've done bad. Because the Bible is very clear. If you do good, God will bless you. If you do bad, God will curse you. And so they were like, well, and if God is cursing you, who am I to argue with God? And so they would justify being literally cruel to people who were down by a spiritual argument. And it's interesting, there's still people that think like that. I don't know if you've ever run across somebody who has said, you know, if you just have enough faith, you'll never get sick. You'll be blessed and you'll have lots of money. If you're just spiritual enough, good enough of a Christian, none of those things will affect you. It's the same kind of thinking. And if you're not so blessed, it's sort of like, well, I guess you didn't have enough faith. I guess, well, maybe you didn't have some sin in your life that you haven't taken care of. Something like that. How many of you have ever heard somebody use the term, what did I ever do to deserve this? And that can go both ways. You know, I win the lottery and that's like, whoa, what did I ever do to deserve this? Or something bad happens. You know, my car burns up. What did I ever do to deserve this? Why is God judging me? And it's that same idea that God just responds to our goodness or our badness in whatever way we go. And Jesus here made it very clear, and not just here, but in his teachings, that good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people. That's just part of our world. It's just a reality. Now, there are things you can bring on yourself, no question about it. but not everything, by any stretch of the imagination, is God bringing something in response to what we have done. And so Jesus here is showing them that their idea of these Levites as a godly person is not necessarily a correct stereotype. So Jesus is crushing another stereotype. And Jesus loved to do this. So then he goes on and says, but a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. And he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and then he put the band on his own donkey and brought him to an inn and took care of him. So you need to understand, to really capture the full power of this story that Jesus is telling here, that the Jews absolutely despised Samaritans. Like, they just thought they stereotyped them as just bad news. They didn't want to have anything to do with them. As a matter of fact, a lot of Jews would detour around the town of Samaria or the city of Samaria just so they wouldn't have to rub shoulders with Samaritans, because they were just felt like they're just bad news. They're just bad people. And the reason for this is because the Samaritans were actually sort of a mixed race. They were partly Jewish, but then they had intermarried with other races as well. And so the Jews were literally racist against the Samaritans. And then they had kind of a hybrid religion as well. They sort of believed in the God of Israel, but they sort of had mixed in some other ideas as well. And so the Jews were just like, you guys just are awful people. I want nothing to do with you. And here Jesus makes a Samaritan the hero of his story. So here Jesus is just blowing up their stereotype. He's just literally coming at them like in exactly the opposite direction from where they would have expected a good Jewish person to come. It'd be sort of like here in Canada. How many of you have ever seen the show Corner Gas? Do you remember the other town that they always, Woolerton? You remember that? How many of you remember Woolerton and how they despised anybody from Woolerton? It would sort of be like telling the Good Samaritan story to Corner Gas, but it was the good Woolerton person. It would be like, no. People from Woolerton are not good people. We just can't accept that. And that's what Jesus is doing here when he's talking about this Samaritan. Like, you got to understand, the Good Samaritan is as an oxymoron in a Jewish mindset. The Samaritans were not good people, but Jesus broke down that stereotype and made him a good person. See, Jesus did a lot of this kind of thing. He made heroes out of people that those people despised. The people his audience thought, ooh, yikes, whoa. Those were the people that Jesus lifted up as examples for everybody to follow. Like kids, like women, like poor people, like sick people, like non-Jewish people, like they're called Gentiles in the Bible. All of those things, all of those kinds of people, Jesus was constantly lifting them out of this bad stereotype. And then all the people that the Jews really admired, like the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the priests and the Levites and all of the experts in the law, Jesus ran them down. He did the opposite to what the Jews did. He didn't admire them. He called them a bunch of snakes in the grass. See how Jesus here is crushing all of these stereotypes? He just thrived on that, it seems like. And it irritated people. It just grated on people. And that's a big reason why they ended up crucifying him, because they just couldn't hack the way Jesus was always kind of in there, sticking it to them as far as the way they thought about other people. Now, it's interesting with stereotyping. Research shows that stereotyping is actually something we all do, whether we realize it or not. It's subconscious. It's actually part of our intelligence. We actually do it in order to organize our thoughts better. And basically what happens is we don't have time to individually get to know every single person that we interact with. It's impossible. We don't have the time nor the mental or emotional capacity to do that. And so in order to keep ourselves from going crazy, trying to keep all of these different ideas and thoughts and realities about all these different people, we stereotype people. We categorize them into different categories so that okay, you're one of those. We slip them into that category. I get it. Now I know where you come from. You're one of those. And so we do this subconsciously just to keep some semblance of organization in our inner world, in our minds. And stereotyping in and of itself at that level is not a bad thing. Obviously, we can't even control it. And if we didn't do it, we'd drive ourselves crazy. And it actually can be helpful. It can even save your life. One of the stereotypes that I have is that all snakes are dangerous. Is that true? No, it's not true. But let me tell you, the opposite is not true either. Some snakes are dangerous. So I'd rather just stereotype all of them that they're dangerous and I'm just going to stay away. Because if I did the opposite stereotype that none of them are dangerous, I could get killed. See how this can work for you sometimes? I mean, another stereotype that I've run across, maybe you have as well, is that church people are all hypocrites. How many of you have run across that stereotype? Yeah, a few of you. Is that true? Well, I've met quite a few church people that aren't hypocrites. Sure, there are some that are hypocrites, but not everybody. But for somebody who is scared of going to church, it can be a pretty convenient stereotype. Because if they can categorize everybody that goes to church as a hypocrite, then they can justify not wanting to be part of a church, right? The problem with that is, if you do that, you're kind of a snob, aren't you? Like if you categorize other people as snobs, that's kind of snobbish. Yeah, you're kind of being a hypocrite when you categorize a whole group of people as all of them being hypocrites. And that's why my common response to people saying, well, I don't go to church because they're all just a bunch of hypocrites, I usually say, don't worry about it. Come on down. One more won't hurt. The truth is, we all feel like we need to belong somewhere. In some group of people, we need to feel like we fit. And typically, what we do is we tend to stereotype the people in our group as relatively good people. At least they are, decent people that we should get to know as individuals. And then we tend to look at everybody outside of our group as suspect. I don't know. Those people over there, yeah, they're kind of shady. Those people over there, they're kind of, I don't know. And we tend to group them together, and we stereotype them in that way. And so we don't look to get to know them as individuals. We just sort of stay away from them because we've stereotyped the whole group. Here's something that shocked me as I was doing some research for this message. Researchers have discovered that a lot of stereotypes actually are fully in place in our minds by the time we turn 5 years old. And in a lot of cases, we live with those same stereotypes for the rest of our lives. So we learn who are the dangerous bad people and who are the good guys by the time we're 5 years old, and then we pretty much stick with that. That's amazing, isn't it? The only thing that really can cause us to begin to shift our stereotypes, in most cases, is a major crisis in our lives where we're forced to get to know people outside of our little group, and then we discover, they aren't quite as bad as we thought they were. So what is prejudice then in comparison to stereotyping? Well, stereotyping is actually just the precursor to prejudice. Prejudice is stereotyping on steroids. It's taken one step too far. And we're all vulnerable to this. Whether we realize it or not, we are vulnerable to taking it one step too far. And we all need to recognize our own vulnerability here and be very humble. And I believe this is the attitude that Jesus is calling us to. Jesus, if we want to really follow him, calls us to do our utmost to recognize our own vulnerability to prejudice. See, the interesting thing is, when you watch Jesus carefully, you never see Jesus responding to somebody in a, oh, you're one of them kind of ways. Jesus responds to everybody as a unique individual. Like, there's lots of sick people around in Israel when Jesus was there. But you never see Jesus respond to a single sick person like, oh yeah, you're one of those sick people. One of those people that's, cursed by God. What do you see Jesus doing? He doesn't even assume that sick people want to be made well. He sees them so much as an individual that when he turns to them, he says, what would you like me to do for you? You see how Jesus is not making any assumptions about that person, even though it would be very easy to stereotype a sick person like, oh yeah, a sick person wants to be made well, obviously. But he doesn't do that. He goes, what would you like from me? And I believe Jesus is giving us a role model there for how he would like us to treat one another. So when we are tempted to go, oh yeah, you're one of those, we go, whoa, stop, Dallas. I need to get to know who that person really is. I need to know their story. I need to know where they're coming from, how they are uniquely different from everybody else. Sure, they may have some characteristics that might fit a stereotype that I've had in the past, but they might have a lot of characteristics that don't fit my stereotype either. And I need to be humble enough to be able to lay down my stereotype in those moments and say, who are you really? That, I believe, is the heart of Jesus. Less than 2 months ago, we had Christmas. On Christmas Eve, we had several people come to our church here who had never set foot in a church before in their whole life. Never once. Can you imagine? Like, we grew up in Canada, we think everybody goes to church at least once somewhere along the way. But these were people that literally had never, ever been in church. Completely green, so to speak. I heard one of them made the comment afterwards, well, they actually weren't as weird as I thought they'd be. A stereotype was crumbling. Did you know you're not as weird as what people think you are because you come to church? Isn't that comforting? Maybe if people got to know us, they would go, oh no, they are as weird as I thought. But for this one person anyway, first glance, we weren't quite as weird as they thought we would be. So my question for all of us to wrestle with as we kind of go through this month is, how do I ensure that I see people as individuals and not just as part of a stereotypical group? How do I ensure that I see people as individuals that God is maybe calling me to get to know as an individual and not just a stereotype? See, loving people is what we do around here. And I believe loving people calls us to go beyond stereotypes and to actually get to know each other as we really are. So I don't know where you're at today in your walk with Jesus. Maybe you're still exploring, and that's fine. You know, Jesus invites us to come and just taste and see how you like it. And if you are here today or online today and that's you, I'm so glad you joined us, because that's exactly what we want to have in our church family, is people who are just there checking it out. But like Pastor Johan said earlier, for a Jesus follower to really understand the full benefit of what it means to walk with Jesus and be transformed with Jesus, you need to go all in. Like, you don't get the full benefit if you just sort of stick your toe in the water. The real benefits, the real hardcore benefits of following Jesus are only experienced when you go all in. And maybe today you're at that point in your journey where you've been checking things out, you've been kind of doing your research, you've been sort of just getting a feel for who Jesus is, and you're going, yeah, okay, I think I'm ready to go all in. And if you're at that point today and you're ready to go all in, I'd like to pray for you. And you know who you are. So in a minute when I pray, I want you to join me in that prayer. And for all of us, I want us to open our hearts this morning to Jesus and say, Jesus, show me where I'm holding people at a distance because of my stereotyping. And show me if there's somebody that you would like me to get to know personally, that I might be hesitant to do that with because I'm stereotyping them. I'm going to take this a step further. Here's a challenge. Maybe there's somebody in this church that you kind of are a little bit shy around. You're not too sure about them. Maybe Jesus is challenging you to join the same small group as they're in, so that you can get past that stereotype or whatever it is that makes you feel a little bit like, just to get to know them personally. If that's the case for you, just talk to Pastor Emma. She'll help you figure out what group they're in and get you connected, or whatever. So let's pray. Dear Jesus, I thank you that you were so personally invested in the people that you met. And when you met me, you became personally invested in me. I thank you that you didn't just go by a stereotype of me, going, oh yeah, those people born in Edmonton, just can't trust them. You didn't do that. You embraced me, pushed past any stereotypes that would have been easy to embrace regarding me, and you embraced me. I pray, Father, that you would help all of us to have that same attitude. And then, Jesus, I also want to pray for people who are listening to me right now, who have been exploring faith in you, kind of checking you out, just kind of figuring out whether this is for them or not. And now they're at that place where they're ready to go all in. I pray, Jesus, that you would give them the courage to take the leap. And I pray, Jesus, that they would experience the full blessing, the full transformation that happens when we go all in with you. I pray that they would find the ways that you are calling them to walk in, to be able to give over their life completely to you. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.